session. If we could all come in quickly and grab a seat, that would be great. Together a pitch Bible. So thank you very much, Jo. Welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me? It is a weird thing, actually, you can't hear that. Firstly, I just want to make an announcement. I've left my iPhone, that's right, in the bathroom. And if anyone has found it, it's a white iPhone, please hand it in. Great. So anyway, so I can see in the room we've got lots of people who I don't know, which is fantastic. You know, these are the people who want to know as opposed to the people who already know. So today I'm going to talk to you about creating a pitch Bible through my own experience and through the experience of what we do at SLR. And I hope that as I go through this process, it'll give you some insight into some of the thinking and how you have to be very plastic with your thinking. You have to let it be moulded to the response, the feedback you get. And that's the most important thing that I would give, the most important bit of advice that I would give is to actually have your idea be allowed to change. Because if you have a very locked, solid idea, the process of making content is a very collaborative process. So you have to really be open to people's ideas, their thoughts, their feedback, and you don't have to always take everything on board, but you really have to respect what comes to you, because it really will help you to shape and understand what you're trying to do. So creating a pitch Bible. So it's kind of a funny word, the Bible. What is the Bible? Has anyone here got ideas that they want to put into a pitch Bible? Yes? Okay, there's a few here. And I'm sure that, you know, I go to these conferences and I get intimidated by these fantastic panellists who are really innovative. Their experience shows that they understand the market. They've got the relationships with the people to actually get meetings with them. And I know that it must be very daunting. But I think the thing that I always come away with is that there's room for lots of kinds of ideas in the marketplace. And I think that's what you have to really embrace, is that sometimes you see stuff and you're really influenced by something, or you just see that that's working. Like that factual session was fantastic. And that is a really big part of television now, factual television. It's on adult mainstream as well as kids mainstream. But I work in a more traditional linear scripted working process, and there's room for that kind of television, because I believe that despite the fact that we're in control of our media, and when you see the stats, like the Disney stats that they showed this morning, where television is still king, 90% of kids are still watching linear television. I mean, what does that say to us as producers or as people who come up with ideas? And I think that there's an element of discovery that comes in linear television that you can't control. And I think that's why it's important, because that's where diversity comes in through a linear content. Because if you have to choose all of your content, you may not choose stuff that you stumble upon, or stuff that surprises you, or stuff that you didn't think you'd like and that you do like. And it's the same for kids' content. And as a parent of two children, 11 and 7, my observation is that they come back from school, their brains are full of being forced to think, and that they actually want to be passive. They want to actually allow viewing that they aren't in control of. And that's really as important as seeing viewing where they're learning. But we all enjoy scripted drama for that reason, that we're going places that someone is taking us. They're telling us a story. So I think of content as a friend. And I think when you have an idea, you have to think, what kind of friend is your content going to be to the audience? And that's a really good way of thinking about it, because in kids' television, I think that there's friends that you want to hang out with, and it's the same in adults, I think. There's friends who you just want to sit down, they know you, it's a safe environment, they make you laugh. They don't challenge you because you feel you're in a world that's protected, like you are when you hang out with your circle, people who get you. Then there's those friends that you're inspired by, that take you places, that they've done stuff that you imagine you could do, but you don't know if you're that kind of person. And that's really inspiring to watch that and aspire to some of that. Then there's friends who are really clever, that they know a lot, and you just want to be around them because you think, just by hanging around them, I might actually pick up some of what they know. And then there's friends who are also intense, that actually emotionally, they challenge you to actually discover your emotions, you help them to deal with their problems, and you learn through their experiences. So content is a friend, and we have that as adults. We have a relationship with content, and so when you're thinking about your idea, these are the kinds of things you need to think about, what your content is going to be to the audience, because ultimately you're making something that has to be taken into the world of the audience. So creating a pitch Bible. So you have an idea, and I think this is really a useful process to do, even if you can't get in front of a broadcaster, even if you're just making your own project, in whatever format or genre that is. This is a really useful process in trying to find the boundaries of what your idea is. So I'm going to use the show Gasp, which I don't know if any of you know. It was a show that we made, and the other thing you might have realised is that hearing content producers talk is that content takes a long time to get up. So this probably took us about 5 years from pitching to making, and that's just because broadcasters buy in cycles, so they'll only buy 3 years ahead of what they're going to show on the television. So it's very much a future medium because they have to buy the shows ahead of time so the producers have got time to make it. So if you've got to fit into that buying cycle, and then there's a lot of trends in those cycles, so broadcasters are very influenced by trends. The other thing is that the actual people who are purchasing the shows change very often, so the sensibilities of who's being pitched to can change in a heartbeat. The people who can change quite often they want to assert their position, so they'll actually be interested in buying quite a different kind of content to what the previous person has. So the marketplace is not really controllable. But what you have to do is to show that in your world, the world that you control, which is your idea, that you're in control of that world. So Gasp. Okay, through the eyes of a fish. Okay, so as we start, these are the main points to keep in mind. So what is a Bible? So a Bible is really an opportunity to show the look and the feel of your show or your idea. In this case, we were making long-form content, so we had to show the look and feel of our idea, that it had legs, that you could tell lots of stories within this show. You know, having been pitched to and actually making shows that are pitched to, one of the things the trap that people fall into is they think if you show a lot of something, it shows that you've really done a lot of thinking. But actually, less is more, particularly when you're pitching to busy people, because they do not have time to consume what you think is going to show them the breadth of your idea, but they really don't have time to do that. You need to show your idea in a really economical way. So you have to keep it brief and break it down to its essence. Now, when you come up with this animation is a very visual medium, so we always think visually, but I think if you have an idea that's a live action or if it's a format show, the visuals will really help to show the feel of what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to show something that's a bit comic, then make it feeling fun. If nobody's going to trust a funny person who doesn't show the comedy. If it's so you can use the look, and that can just be from a graphic design point of view, to actually just give a tone and feel, and that really helps to make it stand up from the desk. So in the case of animation, you can create the visual identity that is selling your idea. So as well as that is the writing, and so if you're more of a writer, you can really convey that, and that can be the more important thing. In the tone of the writing, you can actually convey your idea. So give the words a flavour. Show them that you understand the genre that you're saying your idea is working in. And so that you can give them a sense of the feel of the idea from the outset, and they can go, yeah, I think this person's funny, or I think I can see the drama in this, or I can see where the action lies, and that can come with your writing. The other thing that was a big bit of advice that I heard from a broadcaster once, and it's the thing that we always try to think of, is that they're going to say no even before they've opened up your project, because statistically, when you hear the stats of like 1 in 500 ideas can get up if you're pitching to a broadcaster that's looking at stuff from all over the world, they have to say no 499 times. So they're going to say no, and they don't want to say no, but they have to, because everybody has limitations, they have budgets, they have shows from different territories that they're dealing with, so they're going to say no. So each time you give your idea, you have to give them a reason to say maybe, or yes. That's the hard bit. Okay, so first you have to have the idea. Now, in this case, we had a book that we optioned called Gasp from Terry Denton, and I'm not sure if any of you know Terry Denton. He's a fantastic illustrator, writer who does a lot of stuff with Andy Griffiths, and he was a teacher himself, and he just has this fantastic connection with kids. He understands kids, he thinks like a kid, he's very funny. We optioned the rights to this book, which was just a little picture book, Gasp, but we just loved the main character, and we just saw its potential, and we optioned it as an idea. So in the beginning there was a book series, so he'd done a series of 5 books. They were very small stories, only about 12 to 14 pages. So working with a book obviously gives us a bit of equity because we've got a world that has connected, we've got characters that have proven to be universal, and there's a likability that's already set within the minds of the people that are reading it or that you're pitching to. But then for us, we had to capitalise on that and actually find out what was the essence that made that connection. Because translating a book into 52 11-minute episodes, which is 13 hours of content, is actually, you have to really understand what makes the idea tick. So the things we loved about the book, and as you can see here, it was very funny. That was very important, particularly with kids. Comedy and animation obviously go very well hand in hand, but there's also action and genre. But comedy with kids really works. And whatever genre you're working in, I would say you always inject a bit of comedy because that's where the kids feel, they're feeling relaxed, they're feeling like it's a world that they can be in. It had fantastic visualizations, which we loved. It was a world that was really around a really central character, which when you have a lot of content to produce, you really need to have that central character or characters that are driving that world. He was a very strong character, which makes it easy to actually build worlds around. It was perfect for animation, and there were lots of really good situations that we could see in this book. He got locked in the freezer, and there was a whole episode which was very Antarctic. So we thought there's potential, even though it was a limited world, we could see its potential. So once we'd optioned the rights, we had to then go into it and think, okay, so what is this about? What is it about this fish? This was Terry Denton's cover. It's the breathtaking adventures of a fish left home alone. And so we started thinking about, why is this connecting with kids? And I think Terry Denton obviously made this connection himself, that instead of it being the kid left home alone, it was the fish left home alone. Straight away, it just opened up a whole lot of potential stories. So now we understand a little bit about the world, so we have to then put it into a proof of concept, which is called the Bible. And that's just a standard industry document that people would say, have you got a Bible of your idea? So a Bible is pretty much, it's like going back to school. It's the 5 W's. What, who, where, when, why. You really have to make sure you answer all of those questions in your idea, because all of that will show how your idea is working. So in this, and then you need to obviously have your title. The title of your series is really important. And another good bit of advice that I was given, and which I think is a really good one, is to think about your title in a TV guide and where it would sit. And for someone who didn't know the show, what would they think just seeing your title in a guide? And that's a really good way of seeing, is the title too long? Does it say something that it's not? Is it going to connect to people just from curiosity? So that's a really good thing to think about with your title. The format's really important because that's you're telling them before they've even started reading about your idea how much your idea needs to be executed. And in this case, in children's television, they want a lot of content because they like to strip it. And they like to fill the broadcast space. So that equals 13 hours of content, which is a lot of production. And really importantly is who your audience is. And that's something you may not have in your outset, but it's really something, if you want to work with kids, it's a very fractured and very highly researched market to content that it's made specifically for different age groups. Now in this case, 6 to 9-year-olds are the kids that really are embracing animation. Animation really splits as they get a little bit older. The stats show that girls leave animation at about 11. They want to get on to the real world. They want to understand the world that they're going into, so they really like a lot of the kind of social, live-action dramas or sitcoms. That's why Disney owns that market, because they put the girl characters in a world and they're going through all the situations that they're going through are stuff that the audience is moving into. Girls are a little bit more community or aspirational mind, so that really works for them, and that's not definitive. Obviously, girls still like animation. I think a lot of the Cartoon Network, the spin-offs that they're doing, and some of the big regular shows, and the Princess show that they've got the new one out. They're all, and there's a new show called it's a new show from Cartoon Network, which is a female creator. So it is actually shifting, but traditionally they do leave around that age. Boys love animation; they will stay with it, and as you know, the Comedy Central and all the subscription channels that actually have got the late night comedy, boys will stay with comedy for a long time, and animation particularly. So to 6 to 9 year olds in the kids space, if you're talking about making it in Australia and you're trying to get funding on a commercial network, you have to make stuff within, if it's a C classification, and that's, I think, something, if you want to make Australian content and you want to get money from Australia, you should look up the ACMA guidelines to what qualifies as Australian content. Because if you want to make a show in Australia, it has to be classified, and you need to work within those guidelines. If you go to the ACMA site and look at the classification guidelines, and there's a P and a C. Now, in the past, they just had one category for C. So it was like kids from 5 to 14, it was one category. And as producers, you can't just make content for a kid who's 5 and expect the 14-year-old to still watch it. So over the last 6 years, probably, they've actually put categories in within that. There's a 5 to 7. They're those kids that have just left. They're leaving the preschool channel or the preschool shows. They're actually going into school. They're starting to look up, but they're still not. They don't want to go into the big world. They still have to be kids. 6 to 9 is smack in the middle. So they're actually just really, they've got a stronger sense of identity. They know who they are. They know what they like, and they like the stuff that's made for them. They're not yet really having to show off that they're actually ready for content that's beyond them. And this stuff is really made for them in mind. Then you've got the 8 to 12-year-olds who are kids that are aspirational. They're moving into teenage years. They're seeing the world ahead of them. And they look up. They look at content that is challenging. It's challenging their security, where they feel comfortable. And that's a learning process for them to actually be part of that content. But they also still feel comfortable in that younger end of the content where they feel safe. And then, so that's a very interesting. And then there's the 12 to 14s, and you lose them. They start watching everything that the adults are watching, embracing. So you've got your title, you kind of know how much you want to make, and you've got your audience. So now you and this is something that may not come at the beginning, but this is where you have to pull your essence in. You have to think, and you've probably read all the, if you're doing writing, pitching ideas, that getting the one line in, and the one line is useful, again, to think about it just from a marketing point of view. People have to put your idea in with a lot of content. People need to find your content. These lines are used in so many ways. So if your show is showing on a channel, they'll just have the title and they'll have a little byline, and then the consumer or the people decide whether they want to watch your show or not. So you kind of have to, it's the selling marketing tool, and it's up to you. It's not up to the marketers to find what that is, because it's defining your idea in a way that people can capture. So in this one, we actually had a couple. So it was for everyone who has a pet, had a pet, or wished they had one. So that was kind of because we wanted to connect it into the world of pets that kids would have. So, and there were lots of different kinds of pets. Some kids don't have pets, but they wish they had one. Some kids have one, or they used to have one that died. So that was a way. And the original one, which came from the book, which we added to the fin slapping adventures of Fish Left Home Alone. That's Straightaway, kind of says what it is. So then all this information goes onto the cover, and that's your kind of way of saying, okay, come into my idea. It's got the idea, how long it is, who it's made for. Here you go, you can see it's 6 to 11-year-olds. So this is a very early document that I'm showing you too, and you can see how it's evolved. And, this is just done. This was done probably 6 years ago. But it was done just in a WordPress program before, InDesign was being really used a lot more. Just giving a sense of feel, putting an image in. So you don't have to be, really wow. You just need to have a nice central image and say what your idea is. Make people want to turn the page. Okay, so now what's inside the Bible? So you have a show introduction, and so it's a brief introduction of what your idea is. You set up the genre that you're telling the story in, its style and its format, so that's to do with, and you're setting up your idea in a brief, in the same way that if you were writing an essay or doing a talk, it's just your introduction. Keeping it really brief is important. So here you go. This is our intro page. So Gasp is a pure comedy for kids, 6 to 11 years. We later brought that down through market research, or through market response from the broadcasters. It's based on these books. It's told from the point of view of the fish, and that was really important because he was the central narrative drive within the series. And the series explores the family relationships through the wacky adventures of pets left home alone. So straight away, we've set up just that simple logic of where we're going to get the stories from. We've got the characters there, and we've put them in. So we wanted to set up that this is a family world, so it's a familiar world that the kids, the audience would know. So in this world, it's where nothing is normal or straight up. Animals walk, talk, and watch TV. Guppies ride motorbikes, and goldfish surf the internet when the humans aren't around. So in that little paragraph, we set up the logic within that world, that in our world, the animals are very intelligent and they deceive the humans, because that was a really important story point. And that was a big part of Terry's original book idea, was that what does this fish do when his owner's not there? Okay, so you have a synopsis, which is different to the intro. The synopsis is an expanded view. It's a more detailed account of how your world is working, who your main characters are, where it's all happening. So you're starting to expand the idea. So this needs to show how and where the story is coming from, because that's because these people that you're pitching to really understand the business of storytelling. So you need to show that you understand the business that you're pitching to. So here you go. This is an example of an expanded, so the synopsis. So this is the world according to Gasp. He's a little fish with a big heart and even bigger emotions. He sees the world from a kid's point of view, which is very important because that's our way into the audience. And he thinks like a kid because, let's face it, when you're little, you shouldn't take yourself or life too seriously. So again, that's tonally, that's an example of how we've used the language to kind of show that we're not being serious. This is not a serious world. We just want to have fun. Talk about how, using his imagination, the world is packed with unlimited potential, because that was really important to show where the stories are going to come from, where the story ideas are coming from. So the adventures are just waiting to be discovered around every corner, under every pillow, and even beneath the hallway runner. So there we're setting up, people will say, well, how are you going to get 52 stories out of a fish in a house? And so we're saying, just very simply and quickly, well, the story is everywhere. We can find it in all these little places. So yet no matter how much trouble and disaster Gasp creates, he never loses his optimism and belief in himself. And that's the positive drive of the character. So really simply and succinctly, because again, you've got people who've got limited time, you just want to get them in, draw them in. And then we just had some big keywords. It's fresh, it's surprising, colourful, and just a little bit twisted. So then once you've got your intro and your synopsis, they're kind of getting into what this world is set up as about. So now you want to introduce your characters. And in order of importance, very important. And it's a breakdown of them. And so they can understand what the character's going to do in this world that you're proposing. So we want to let them know who they are, their attitude to the world and the other characters, because that's where you're going to get your story from. Because we all live in a world that's a very reactive world. So we need to understand how these characters see themselves in the world. Show their strengths, talk about their strengths and their weaknesses. So to do that, you have to define a character. And I think a lot of people, and through my experience of working with writers and creating characters and seeing characters that don't work, it's very useful. And trying to understand why they didn't work or why they weren't functional in a story is a way in which you have to interact, your characters have to interact. So, and I think these are the things that I think some people create characters, and but what your characters are defined by is what they say, because that's when they're actually telling the world what they think. What they do, because actions quite often are stronger than words. So the way that they act in the world and react is defining them, and how they think. And that's depending on the way that your story is. That can be hard, that can be challenging. It's much easier in books because you can create an internal narrative that gives you insight. But when you're in a world where your point of view is like watching, it's very hard to get individual internal thoughts unless you have an internal thought system set up. So really the way that they think is what's informing them to say things and to do things. So that's how those three things are a pyramid which everything revolves around. And I think people can get stuck by, and we did this ourselves, when a character is defined by the job that they have, or a hobby that they do, or where they come from culturally. But that doesn't define a character, because if you don't understand your character, you'll get to that character and you won't know how they react in a situation. Even if it was just the teacher, it's like, who is that teacher? Does that teacher enjoy teaching? Where are they in their life at the moment? How do they control a crazy class? That's what defines them. It's not that the teacher is Indian or that the teacher likes to play the guitar. That's not defining the character, because then you won't know how to perform that character in your story. So don't get seduced by, the clothes that they're wearing or how they sound with their accent, because that's not defining them. And you'll get stuck when you're writing your story if that's the only characteristics you've given them. So just to show you in how our way of thinking, so we had Gasp as the central character. So these were his positives. He was imaginative, he was daring, he was determined, he was fearless. They're all really, stories that can propel us into story very quickly. But his negatives was that he was impatient, selfish, naughty, was very demanding, and he was desperate. And this is us analysing it from the original story. The desperate part was really important, because in the original story, in the books, he had a limitation by how much time he was allowed to be out of the water. But as we were writing the story, we're like, well, we can't just keep going back in and out of the bowl over the course of the story. That's just limiting. So we that desperation to the need for water, that logic of human logic, that was one that we let go of really quickly, because we found, as we start to think through stories, that that's not going to get us anywhere. We're constantly going to be going backwards and forwards. The main thing about him was that, and in his world, and the defining aspect of the book, was that he wants everyone to leave him alone, because in his view, he's the world revolves around him. He's the fish in the fishbowl. So his fish point of view was outwards, not us looking inwards to him. The interesting thing was, and the difference between that, what happened here when we started to pitch the series, and I think we wrote 2 scripts. The feedback we were getting was that he's not a very likeable character. He doesn't want to be in the world with anyone else. And when you're talking to a kid audience, what are you saying about, and this is stuff that only we could do in hindsight, because we were going from the book, we were going, yeah, this is great, this is a fantastic character. What are you saying to kids who live in a family of siblings? That it's better to get rid of your siblings so that you can be the only sibling? And where is your story going to come from? As we start to think about it and try to work it over, Gus's need to be the only one in the house meant that every story had to be him getting rid of the other characters. And that was, when we thought about it and we started to go down that storyline, that's really limiting, because that's not taking us to possibilities when he just wants to get rid of everyone. And they were all completely valid points, and we kind of had to go back. And so we were in a development with a German broadcaster at the time, and they were really wanting us to go down this particular line because they really liked this line of character, but we were getting this feedback from other people saying that he's just not likeable. We like the idea, we love the potential, we love the setup in the world, but that central character, he's funny, he has all those things, but his negatives were actually overpowering the positives. So we had to go back to the drawing board. And we decided that, what about if he was the opposite? What about if he woke up every day and he wanted to make the world better for everyone he lived with? And so we changed that negative drive, the same drive, all those things. He was imaginative, daring, determined, fearless. We changed that central drive of him to not get rid of everyone, but to make his world better. And that just opened up the possibility for storytelling for us. So he became all those same things, but it's just that his central drive was actually one to make things better. The other thing that was an important thing that we did was, and I'll just skip forward, oh no, I'll stay back there. So, and here, because he's a central character and the world revolves around him, in this one we were showing that all his desires are driven around his need to please his owner. In the same way that a kid, ultimately, their currency from their parents is love, approval, the support to do things that they dream about. In the same way, so we felt that those characteristics in a kid to their adult would be the same as a pet to their owner. So Gasp, and that again gave us a lot of story potential because Gasp just wanted to fix Ginger's world up as well as the pets that he shared the world with. So in animation, obviously, because it's a visual medium, we have to show the potential of that. And this is a comedy-driven show with lots of action, so it's really important that we show that this character could emote, because he's just a little fish. So it's like we had to show that this little fish could have big emotions. So once you've got that central character, you need to surround your character, your main character, with really other interesting characters that are equally interesting, but also not more interesting. Because if you make your secondary characters more interesting, you'll find that your main character becomes less useful and less likeable. Because unless that's important, if that's important that the fall guy or the fall girl actually has to come down a notch, that's important. But sometimes that's the trick. We fall in love with the characters that just come on for a moment. And then we go, well, where did they go? They were more interesting than the mains. So you have to create friends and allies. You have to have people who are on the same side as your hero or your main character. But you also need to have antagonists, because they're the ones that are going to give you conflict, and they're going to create story and give your characters room to grow. So the other thing you need to really make sure is that your character's not too alike, and that's a danger that can happen, is that you create characters that have got the same role within the story. And when you have all those characters sitting around a room, you're going to find that if you've got characters that are doubling up, there's going to be one person who's standing around with nothing to say, because they're just going to say the same thing as your other character. So you have to be a bit brutal and go, well, which one is better? Which one? They've got the same function. Which one do we lose? Make sure you give your characters differences so that they need each other. That's for the same reason, but that's different to making them too alike. It's as simple as having a strong character who needs a weak one, a smart one who needs some emotional guides. Your characters, like we are in the world, need people around us that give us different advice to conquer the conflict which is within the story that you're creating. Understanding what makes them strong and likeable, and I think that showed you how we had to change the way we were thinking, because we had to change that undercurrent of his central drive. And what are they afraid of, and what can make them unstuck? Because that's where your stories are coming from. It's when these characters are put into situations that they have to overcome. That's where all story has conflict. So when we created the stories, we were looking back at the original source. We were saying, okay, so he shares this world with a dog and a cat. And of course, he thinks he's smart as things, so the dog's just hasn't got much brains, and the cat is just got her own agenda. In the original books, it was Gus' pet owner, or his owner, was called Yogurt Breath, because everything was told from his perspective. The dog was Dog Box, the cat was Cat Flap, the owner was Yogurt Breath. So everything was so this series was really being driven around this character's perspective on the world. We had these crazy characters called the Winstons, who lived out in the slimy pond out in the garden. And they were like the feral cousins that would come. So as we started to develop this, we looked at these characters, and the thing that we got a bit stuck on was the pet owner, because again, we're looking back at the audience and thinking, what is it? Are they really interested in the world of grown-ups? Would it be better that the owner was a kid? Because then they could feel like that could be my pets when I leave the house. That could be my pets doing that. Would they really be as interested if they thought it was the pet of a girl who had a job, had boyfriend issues, came home, and part of her not being a great owner was because she had her own agenda, her own life? And again, that was another big central change that really helped us to just open up the world for the stories, because that's what you have to do. You have to make your characters work for your stories. And taking that sensibility, we decided to split that, because again, we wanted to have a potential for more conflict. And so we kept it from Gus' point of view, and we made these twin siblings, Ginger and Fred, because we figured Gus was at home watching a lot of television. He would have loved old movies, and so he's just called them Ginger and Fred. Ginger was the 10-year-old love of his life, and she had an annoying, very conniving older brother who we kind of did when we originally outset, we thought we could have the potential for him noticing the pet world having its own parallel universe and trying to catch them out. We kind of thought that, but when we actually got into production, we found that we just didn't have room in 11 minutes to create that really quite complex subplot of when your worlds shift, because that's It's a lot harder than you think when you've got a world where you've got to have a parallel world where you've got characters acting with each other and you have to define when they're behaving like pets, when they're behaving like characters, when the characters are aware of that other world. It didn't end up being useful, and it was much more useful for him to just be an annoying brother. So as you can see in here, I won't go into reading it, but you'll see that there's all a similar amount of content in each one of the little bits of descriptions of the characters. And I think I've given a PDF to the conference, so if you wanted to read this in more detail, you can look at this. So cat flap and dog box. So as we developed and went down the road again, we thought, well, we've got Gasp as a central character, and we thought, and we had a great writer we were working with who really was our script editor, and as we were in the room, we wanted to define the needs of the characters, and it ended up being a fantastic way, which I think is quite a good approach, and that we had, with Gasp, we gave him 3 really strong characteristics. He had heart, he had smart, and he had courage. And they're 3 quite different strong characteristics that allow him to react and be in a situation. Now with the secondary characters, we thought they can't have as much character detail within the story, so let's take away one of those and create a kind of a need pyramid. So Cat Flap, we gave her smart because we figured the cats anyone who's a pet owner who has a cat, I was a cat person, they're always sitting on the books you read, the newspapers that you put down, any piece of paper. So we took that step further, that they're actually wanting to read what it is. They're not actually just going on there. When you go away, that they're owning that. So we made her, she's obviously very smart. Because she's a scaredy cat, we took away her courage because we felt that would give us some story potential, is that she had the heart and the smart, but she lacked courage, because then she would need Gasp to help her in a situation. Dog box, we thought, would have a lot of courage because he's just an act before you think kind of character. And we thought he'd have a lot of heart because dogs do. They're just so loyal and devoted to their owners. But what we took away was his smart, which obviously gave us a lot of comedy potential. But it allowed us to give him and his relationship to Gasp a really strong need. Gasp could use him because he wasn't very smart, because he had a lot of courage. So he was a bit like the hired thug in a way, or the hired comic sidekick. That allowed us to have a lot of comic potential in our stories. Now, as we developed the story, and this is the thing that you have to start thinking about shape, we thought, now Gasp he's a fish. He's very small on the screen. And as we start to think and come up with story ideas, we start to think about the staging that we would have to create in that, and that we were going to end up with a lot of big heads with a little character who's a full size, just because of the scale issues. And even if you do kind of strong perspective, you're always going to have a big head in the shot when Gasp is talking to someone. So we felt that he needed an ally that would be in his own scale, that actually could allow us to go into the smaller world, into the Gasp's kind of perspective of the world. And we also felt we needed another character for that threesome, in the way that we were breaking up the pyramid. So we brought in this character who wasn't from the original book. And this is where your ideas, as it evolves, it develops, where you create need within your story. So we brought in this character and we called him Beetleneck, because we figured it was around the time it was Christmas, and those Christmas beetles that just fly into your head or into your face, they just arrive. And you don't know why or what, and they just stay and then they're gone. So we had this idea of a character that just flew into this world. And because he's very worldly, we gave him smart, because he'd come from the outside. So he could tell these characters who lived in this very limited world stories of the way that things were in the other world. We thought he would have a lot of courage, because that kind of character just needs to face the world and to be constantly in new places. But what we took away was his heart. And so then once we had that little really quite simple structure, we had these characters that could be with each other and not cross over the needs. So then we had our third central characters. So we had a tier, we had our main, we had our secondary, then we had our incidental, and they're the ones that just kind of pop in for need. So we just decided to give them, because they were just much more one-dimensional, just give them solo characteristics. So Mrs. Winston, who's out in the pond with her little guppy, Winston, we figured she, like a central mum, would have to just be all courage just to get by, just to feed Winston. So she had that central courageousness. And then with Winston, he only had need. So, actually his need was just food. So he was a toddler. He didn't have any of those, but he just was a ticking time bomb toddler. But we just kept him as he was. He didn't really think, he didn't react, he just behaved. So he just would come in and he could create a conflict in the story. And Mum and Dad were really we wanted to think about them in the way that you did in traditional cartoons where you just saw the legs of them coming through, because this is the world of kids. It's not, the adult world was really only important if it actually affected the story. So we really just made them plot developers. So we could use them, so Mum could say, Ginger, you haven't done your homework. If you don't finish your homework, you are not going to go to Shani's house after school. So, but that would give Gasp a reason to help her while she's at school to finish her homework so that she could do the things that she wanted to do, because he would do anything for Ginger. So they were just kind of motivating incidents because we felt that the world was already quite busy. So through that process, you then have to show, you've got a sense of who your character is, what is your world, who are your characters. Now you get into your storylines. And so storylines are really much more important than people really, I think, put on when you're developing an idea, because the storylines show how the mechanics of your world are going to be used. It's not just, this happens and this happens and this happens. You're really executing how all those pieces of your idea are going to work together. You're demonstrating that there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end to all the stories that we are going to tell within this world with these characters that we've just set up. And in our case, we had to show that the idea has got the potential to tell lots of stories. When we were doing this show, Seinfeld was a big influence, just in the sense that they were such strong characters that you could just put a paper bag in the middle of the room and there's a story there, because Kramer's going to go, what's in the bag? And so you need to, if you understand your characters, you can put them in any situation and create comedy, if that's what you're trying to do, or you can create action. Whatever your genre is or the kinds of world that you want, you need to just be able to put something in that world to change it, to make a story come from somewhere. Okay, so the storylines should be brief, and again, it comes down to economics. A beginning, a middle, and an end is kind of what you want to demonstrate in a very economical way. A page of a story, that's the kind of stuff that you do when you start writing a script, but it's not what the broadcasters or the people you're pitching to want to see. They just want to see that you understand the mechanics of your story. So it's the style of the storytelling. Where's the fun in this story? What's going to make this story fun? The kind of the stories, so that you're demonstrating what kind of world and stories are going to happen in this world that will make it worth spending 11 minutes of a lot of hard work on. How the stories will relate to the target audience, that's a really very important one, particularly if you're talking to kids, because the stories engage us. They kind of, I went to television after being in film school, and I did experimental film, and as you do when you're exploring a medium, and I was quite seduced by that medium at the time. And then I had to have a commercial head on my space and go, well, what am I going to do for money? And I ended up in animation. But over the time, I've realised that television is a canvas that's talking to such a big audience. And particularly with kids, there's a certain responsibility that comes with the kinds of stories that you're telling. Because stories help us to understand the world. They make us feel like there's other people in the world that are going through the same things. They make us want to dream. We have real responsibilities as storytellers to tell a good story and to understand who we're telling the story to and why we want to tell that story. So how, in the case of working with kids, broadcasters are looking at how are these stories going to relate to the audience, because they want to show content on their networks that's going to work for the people that they're actually talking to. So if you're telling a story with these characters that is about getting a job, that might not be so appealing or to their world, because that's the world of the future. That's the world that's going to happen in another life to the kids. But if it was how to get something that's going to allow them to do something that will interest them and to do that job, to get money to do that job, then you could do that, but you've got to pull it back into the reasons why kids would be interested in a job. So think about what actually the story is. What is the simple storyline? And who the stories are about. Because that's another way you can get lost, is that you can create all these characters and then you start writing your stories and you realise, I'm writing all these stories for that secondary character to star in. I'm not really showing how these 6 stories that I'm actually coming up with are showing how the characters in this world are all very important. And so you can actually find out what's seducing you in your world. That's why you're leaning towards that character. And you have to then think, what is it that this character's doing that's making the other characters less valuable in my story? So it's a way in which you actually are finding the kind of the boundaries of your story, and you're finding how the kind of the mechanics of it are working. And it's really important to think about how your stories are going to work with your characters in them. Because it's easy to put plot into a story. Anyone can put a plot into a story, but it's really hard to make your characters behave within that plot. If you have too big a plot, you're not going to have room for your characters to behave because they're driven by the plot as opposed to the characters driving the narrative. So here's some examples of the stories that we put into the pitch Bible. Now, probably of these ones, only probably about 3 made it through to the final production, because some of them, as we started to write, they just weren't the stories that were going to work anymore, because as you develop an idea, it changes again. And so something's fishy. So if I can use my eyes. In the series opener, all right, so this was the actual intro. Gus snoops in Dad's suitcase to see if he's brought Ginger's present from his latest business trip, and gets a rude surprise when he discovers a stowaway deep in the folds of a suit, which is Beetleneck. This is the way that we introduced him in. As each of the household pets react to this foreign visitor and his outlandish claims of being the 6th Beetle, that was one of the writers decided to do that, Beetleneck's increasingly desperate attempts to get out of this backwater he's gotten himself stranded in creates a chaos that threatens to get them all evicted. So that was an opener. So we wanted to show how we were going to bring this character into the world, and so that kind of demonstrated an opening story. Pets for Pets, this is one which ended up we did making, so we loved the idea that Ginger and Fred would get bored with their pets and bring home Tamagotchis, then the pets would become obsessed with the Tamagotchis and realise that they couldn't keep feeding them and keeping them alive, so there was just a great potential for a story there. Juan the Fang Shredder was a bit of a Coppola story where a foreign fish gets put into his bowl, and Gasp suddenly has to deal with a roommate who was a bit like the Godfather. So you can actually bring in your sensibilities in your world into the characteristics, but you just need to then bring it into the world in a way in which your audience is going to be able, because they won't know anything about these characters, but you can be influenced by those. So yeah, each one of those, and you can see that there's just, they're very short, and it was probably easier if you, because the PDF is a bit hard to read from here, if you read them in the document I've put in there. And you'll see that there's just a beginning, a middle and an end, and that's really important because that just shows the way that you are actually going to be able to tell a complete story. Now, in 11 minutes, it's become kind of the new format for kids, particularly in comedy, partly because of the way that you can create a lot more content. So broadcasters are quite interested in having 52 as opposed to 26 half hours. They can have 52 11-minuters. It's a bit more of a sitcom setup where it's not really a 3-act structure, so you've got to have these stories that are going to be able to be like rise to the conflict rising and then resolve. It's kind of much more of a 2-act structure. So you don't want to put too much story into if it's an 11-minute, if you're doing a show that's got comedy, you don't need a lot of plot. You just need to be able to create that rising action and then that resolve. Okay, so, the back page, very important, is your contact details. A lot of people actually don't do that. and just leaving them with a sense. So that's kind of the internal contents of the basic structure of what a Bible is, which looks very brief, and they are very brief, but there's a lot of thinking that goes into it. Now, when we made this, we made it with Channel 9. We had some additional funding from Screen Australia, supported that. It was shown on Channel 9 as a first run, and then it went to ABC Kids as a second run. We made it as a co-production with a company in China called Agogo, and it was distributed internationally through a French, who at the time were called Taffy. They got bought out by a French distributor. So once you've got your idea, that's the easy bit. The hard bit is then actually convincing people to make it. And animation is a very expensive medium, scripted. The big challenge we have today is actually competing against format shows, reality television, which is much cheaper to make because they can, in 2 weeks, they can shoot 75 episodes. And we create 52 episodes in 18 months. So, we're up against that. But the good thing with kids, as I say, there's room for variation on the platforms. Kids love seeing themselves in television, and that's really important, to be able to see yourself, hear your accent, see your world, aspire to be in that world. But equally, it's just as important to have worlds that are unlike anything you've ever thought of or could dream about. They're characters that are familiar, that you hang out with so you feel comfortable. As I said before, content is a friend, and that your content is becoming a friend or a foe to someone who's actually going to engage in it. So the conclusion is to say you really want to leave the reader or the person that you're pitching to with an essence of what your series or what your idea is about, and give them that reason to want to see it made and be part of its production. That's easier said than done. But as I said, they're going to say no. You just want to give them a reason to say maybe, because they're never going to say yes straight away because they don't have the power to say yes anyway. You want to get them, you want to see that, and even if they don't, because we've had some great feedback over the years from people who haven't bought our shows, but we had a broadcaster who we had pitched many shows to, and he said to us one time, he said, look, I know that we haven't bought your show, but I think you guys are working really hard and you're doing great stuff, and maybe one day you'll make a show that we can show. But they were driven by a very commercial need, and they had very defined shows that would work for them, and they had a very commercial, obviously, head on that they had to have shows that were actually going to make money for the broadcaster. So, but he was saying, you keep making your stuff because you need variation in the marketplace. So it's important that even though we can't always make a fantastic Disney show or a Nickelodeon show or a ABC Kids show or a show that's going to be on Discovery, there's people out there that are going to want a show, and your show might end up on there as well, because content is a very big space, and there's place for small and big and adventurous and challenging, and that's why it's important that we all make it, I believe anyway. So final thoughts. Now, the most important thing when you're pitching a show, particularly if you go into a broadcast, is really know your market. There's no point in making a kids show if you don't watch kids television, because there's a lot of very clever people out there, and your show has got to sit in amongst that Canadian show, that show made in Ireland, in England, that American show, that show made as a co-production with Italy. Your show has to sit in there. And Bernadette said in the last thing that, with that whacked, we had bushwhacked, whack, what was the other one? It was like the whack championships. There is a universal consciousness, so, and you can't copyright that, because you think it goes up there and someone else is thinking it, just because we're all living in the same cultural world, kind of feeding off the same influences, and inevitably there's going to be a show that's parallel, being made independently without any knowledge of your show, very similar to your show. And that's just because we're all very similar universally, we tick the same way. So what is going to make your show different is just because it's your perspective and it's your understanding of the world in that similar place. So watch kids television and watch more than one episode. You really can't get the sense of a show from one episode. Watch several episodes, because the best way to get into the minds of them is to know what they're watching and what they're enjoying. And if you can watch it with kids particularly, even better, because you'll see what they react to. Because another thing that I learnt when I was younger and had a very strong aesthetic about what is quality, as we all do, we define what we think is great by the things that we think are great. But children, they're much more unbiased and they're less judgmental, and they're much more open to diversity. So they're not coming in with the same judgmental headspace. So, and that was kind of through being a parent, where I watched my kids watch this movie that my mum picked up in a $2 shop that was made in Estonia, a a translation of a classic grim fairy tale that captivated them, because even though the quality of the production may not have been Disney, or it may not be something that they would see on the television, it was a classic story told simply, with characters that were just being very honest, and it was a satisfying experience for them. And I think that's what you have to do to your content as well, is you have to let go of the outer world and make the show that you're making, because continually judging your idea against the influences that have inspired you can really diminish its potential. I think you have to really, and it's not just about believing in it, but believing in its value, that it is it's not the same quality, it's a different quality. Know your audience. As I was saying earlier, the kids market is really splintered into these subgroups, and that's for focused audience reach. And there's a lot of stuff on the internet if you're interested in reading up about the different age groups and what works for them. And really understand the age you're writing for. And remember that they're children, not adults. So that's really a big key message. Know your genre. Now that's a really important one. If you're, you have to really be clear about the style of the storytelling that you're putting these characters, this world in. So if you're saying it's a comedy, you need to make sure that that is what is coming through. If it's a drama, you need to show emotional learning. What are these characters going to do in this world that's going to connect to that audience and allow them to grow emotionally? And if it's action, show them where the thrills are going to lie, because the thing about action, which has really become a lot more challenging for television, is that kids are getting the thrill that they're getting from playing video games, from that first-person perspective of driving, the thrill in the narrative, and then a lot of that stuff may not necessarily have even a narrative, but they're being in the driving position. So as an action storyteller, you're competing. That's what you're competing against in terms of thrill, in terms of that heart racing, adrenaline response to a situation. You're up against someone who's sitting in the driving seat driving that. And so action has become, big action obviously just keeps getting bigger. The big action films at the movies, they just keep getting bigger. And I was talking with an editor who was in one of the last shows and we were making, which was a live action show. He was talking about taking his son to the latest James Bond. And so he took him home and he showed him all the old James Bond stuff. And his son, who I think was 11 or 12, said to him, "Dad, I like the old James Bond better." And he said, "Why do you like the old James Bond?" And he said, "Because I believe it's happening to him." And I think that, live action has become so much reliant on CGI and big effects that the characters are feeling less and less real in that world. And so obviously this kid, without really knowing it, saw that the explosions were real and felt that James Bond was really at risk. And the world just didn't feel clean or didn't feel like a surface. So it's a challenge. If you're saying you're making an action show, I'd say that's one of the most challenging genres at the moment. But you just need to then put that character in those situations, because unfortunately it's expensive to make action, so you really need to have strong characters in that action world and have a very small amount of action to drive that. Know your characters. So strong characters make for compelling storytelling. And again, comes back to understanding what makes them tick, what makes your world tick. And knowing your world. So in our world, we had the internal logic of setting that parameter of that in this world, the pets come to life when the doors are closed, and when the humans are present, the pets have to behave like pets, but they can still create change by just not being seen, which is a very tricky logic, but we had to really firmly lock that down in order to write stories in that. And if you're doing that, you need to kind of show that in your world and convey that in your world. This is a world where the fish can get a credit card because he can just go online and it's totally believable. But when Ginger comes in the room, he's just a fish swimming around in a goldfish bowl. Okay, so we were able to get the show up after lots of pitching and reshaping, and then these are just some stills from the series, which I think I'll demonstrate how all that hard work we did up front really paid off as we were writing the stories. Because when we're writing stories, we have to write scripts when you're in production. It can be a 4-week turnaround for an 11 minutes from start to finish. You have a storyline, gets made into a pitch, the pitch gets approved, it gets put into an outline, it goes to a first draft, second draft. Generally there's a polish and then it's gone. 4 weeks, next story comes in. So you really need to have that internal logic really working really solidly. So this is an episode called Frank and Kitty. So in this episode, the pets were watching the midday movie and it was Frankenstein, and Gasp had a brilliant idea. Ginger had brought home her electricity from a potato experiment, and he thought, why don't we use it to make Dogbox smarter? To do that, they needed some energy, so they just called a lightning bug, as you can, brought down the energy. But there was a mix-up in the experiment, and what happened was Dogbox got Catflap smart, and Catflap lost her intelligence, so she became Frank and Kitty. So it was a bit of a little horror genre. But there you can see that, again, we're just using our characters in the way that they're connecting to create story. This is an episode called Hair of the Fish, where Gasp looks around and he realises he's the only one in the house who doesn't have hair. And he thinks that maybe that's why Ginger stopped noticing him and forgetting to feed him. So he orders some hair-growing tonic from Peru, but he didn't read the label, and turned into a hairy fish. And Ginger rang up the aquarium and said, my fish has turned hairy. And suddenly Gasp was going to be a celebrity, and he thought this was fantastic. He was going to suddenly have the opportunity of being valued, but that would mean him having to leave his family, to leave his home, and have to share a room with sharks who don't have bathrooms. So he had to then find a solution to get rid of the hair. That was a fun episode. Pets for Pets, which